The Pink Letter is one of the most intriguing mysteries in A Song of Ice and Fire. When Jon Snow receives it at the end of A Dance with Dragons, it sets off the shocking course of events leading up to his death, and left fans with many questions. Who really wrote it, and why? Today I'm going to be showing you who I think are the top 4 suspects as to who wrote the Pink Letter. So let's get into the theories. I'd say Ramsay is the most popular suspect for who wrote the Pink Letter. The author in the letter states himself to be Ramsay, and the tone and wording of the letter fit Ramsay's character. Skinning people alive, making angry threats, these all sound like things Ramsay would do. If we're looking at the content of the letter, the word bastard is repeated 4 times, and this makes sense as Ramsay's bastard heritage is one of his biggest insecurities. The people that the author asked for in the letter would also make sense for Ramsay to need. Ramsay has a sort of psychological obsession with Theon, and considering how long Theon spent time with Ramsay, he would know crucial information about Ramsay and Winterfell that Ramsay wouldn't want getting out. It also makes sense why Ramsay would ask for Jeyne Poole, and there's 2 reasons why. One being the obvious, that she's his wife and he needs her to cement his claim on the North. The second is that Ramsay likely knows Jeyne's a fraud. If the Northern Lords found that out, his leverage of being married to a Stark would be completely gone, whether or not Jeyne was with him at Winterfell. Melisandre, Shireen, and Selyse would be important to Ramsay as they could be valuable hostages. Melisandre specifically could be useful as Ramsay states in the letter that he's captured Mance and is torturing him, and that Jon lied about Mance being dead, so clearly he's discovered that Mance was wearing a glamour. He could want Melisandre so he could figure out what type of magic she used, as the ability to change her appearance is pretty useful. We'd want Shireen and Selyse as they're both pretty useful hostages, considering Shireen is Stannis' heir, and Selyse is his wife. He could use them to try and get Stannis to surrender if the claim that Stannis is dead isn't true, or he could give them to the Lannisters to try and gain favor with them. Now, it's unlikely that Stannis has actually died by the time this letter was written, but Ramsay has lied before and isn't exactly known for being truthful. Ramsay could have made this claim as a way to intimidate Jon, and looking at it from Ramsay's perspective, with Stannis' army snowbound and starving, it's logical that Ramsay thinks he would have beaten Stannis in battle anyways. Another thing to note is that Jon has already gotten a letter from Ramsay before, and he noted it as being written in a quote, huge, spiky hand. The handwriting in the Pink Letter isn't specifically described, but if the handwriting were different in this letter, surely Jon would have noted that. One more thing to note is that out of all the suspects, it would be easiest for Ramsay to get the supplies needed to write the letter. He'd likely already have pink wax with him, as he's heir to the Dreadfort, and Winterfell already has ravens that have likely traveled to Castle Black many times. Another thing to note is that while the Pink Letter is described as having a smear of hard pink wax compared to the button of hard pink wax in the previous letters we've seen Ramsay write, I find that this is actually evidence to support Ramsay writing the letter, rather than a piece of evidence contradicting it. Many try to point out the lack of the Bolton seal as evidence of Ramsay not writing it. However, the previous letters we've seen Ramsay write don't have a seal either. The way that both Asha and Jon distinguish the previous letters as being from the Boltons is through only the pink wax. When Asha receives a letter from Ramsay, it specifically says this line in her chapter, quote, "It only stood to reason that they would use pink sealing wax as well," quote. And here's a line from Jon's chapter, when he receives his first letter from Ramsay, quote, "Only the Dreadfort uses pink sealing wax," quote. Even with all the evidence that we have to support Ramsay writing the letter, there are still many inconsistencies. First off, just looking at the information revealed in the letter, it seems extremely impractical that this is what actually happened. The letter vaguely states that Stannis has died after a week-long battle, so for one of the most important characters to be killed off-screen seems pretty anticlimactic. George R. R. Martin himself has also stated that we will see the battle in the Winds of Winter, so it'd be weird if we already knew that Stannis just died off-screen in what's supposed to be one of the most anticipated battles. Then again, Ramsay could easily just be lying. An inconsistency with the claim of Stannis being dead already is that the author of the Pink Letter asked for Theon and Jeyne, but then they also say they defeated Stannis in battle. The last time we see Theon and Jeyne, which is in the Theon Winds of Winter chapter, they're currently Stannis' prisoners. If Ramsay defeated Stannis in battle, surely he'd have already captured Theon and Jeyne. It would be difficult for Theon and Jeyne to evade Ramsay's capture, considering the harsh conditions they're currently in, surrounded by Stannis' guards and army, and a week after their first escape from Winterfell, not to mention the brutal snows outside. Another thing to note is that the previous letters we've seen Ramsay write, one to Jon and another to Asha, were accompanied by a scrap of skin. The pink letter is never stated to have a scrap of skin included with it, which would be weird considering the author states that he skinned the 6 spearwives who accompanied Mance, so he'd have the skin available to send with the letter. Now, it makes sense that Ramsay would want Theon, Jane, Selyse, Shireen, and Melisandre, but why would he want Val and Mance's son? Keeping them as hostages for the wildlings or for psychological torture for Mance is a possibility, but considering how Ramsay's army is slowly falling apart, with the Manderleys and Freys at each other's throats, this would be the least of his concerns. There's no clear-cut reason as to why he would want them. Something strange to note is that so much of the letter focuses on Mance and the wildlings. Why does Ramsay care so much, considering he said he's defeated Mance anyways? The style of the killings of the spearwives doesn't really fit Ramsay's character either. He always flays his enemies, but he never puts their heads on spikes, only leaves their bodies out for the crows or gives them to his dogs. Not to mention, the whole motive of the letter seems to be to get Jon and the Night's Watch to come down to Winterfell. But looking at it from Ramsay's perspective, this seems like a terrible idea. We know that Ramsay can definitely be irrational and let his anger get to his head sometimes, but he's also cunning and manipulative, yet his goal for writing the letter seems completely off, and I'll explain why. Let's assume that Ramsay did defeat Stannis in battle after a week, and then he wrote the pink letter to Jon. If this is true, Ramsay's army would still be dwindled down and exhausted after the battle. Not to mention, his army is very divided, considering how much the Freys and Manderleys hate each other. The Boltons are also already suspicious of Wyman Manderley. If the Manderleys happen to remain loyal during the entirety of the battle, what would stop them from allying with Jon once he arrives at Winterfell? Most of the Northern Lords already hate Ramsay anyways, so does he really think that they would remain loyal to him if he went against Ned Stark's son? There's also already brutal snows outside, so facing Jon and the Night's Watch after all this and expecting to win seems like a very bad idea. Now, another popular suspect for who wrote the pink letter is Mance Rayder. Mance would have many motives to writing the pink letter. He may want revenge against Jon for betraying him and helping Stannis, as well as dismantling his army, or he could want Jon to bring the wildlings down south to Winterfell, so he could unite and lead them once again. Now, there's a lot of evidence within the letter to support Mance writing it. The author of the pink letter refers to the Night's Watch as, quote, Black Crows, which is a phrase almost only used by wildlings. Mance has also snuck into Winterfell before, twice actually. Now remember, Mance used to be a part of the Night's Watch, and he came to Winterfell once to escort his Lord Commander at the time. The second time he came to Winterfell was years after he had fled the Night's Watch. Mance had heard about the legend of Bael the Bard, who was once king beyond the wall and snuck into Winterfell by disguising himself as a bard and kidnapping one of the Stark daughters at the time. When Robert Baratheon came to visit Winterfell, Mance was inspired by Bael the Bard and snuck into Winterfell to go see his arrival. After scaling the wall, Mance disguised himself as a musician called Abel, which is actually an anagram for Bael, and there he played the lute at Winterfell. When Mance arrives at Winterfell in A Dance with Dragons, he again impersonates himself as Abel the musician, and he and the 6 spearwives help Theon and Jane escape. But during their escape, Jane screams, which gives away their position, and 2 of the spearwives were killed after that giveaway. But we don't exactly know what happened to Mance after this, as he was playing music in the Great Hall during the escape. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make here is that since Mance is already familiar with Winterfell, it would probably be easy for him to get the supplies needed to write the letter. This would also support the idea that it's not too out of Mance's character to impersonate somebody, as we've seen him do before with Abel, as well as Rattleshirt. The author of the pink letter also specifically states Jon to tell Melisandre that Stannis has been defeated in battle, and that the author has Lightbringer, which was Stannis' sword. Now we've seen that Mance and Melisandre are close, as Melisandre was the one who glamored Mance and helped him evade execution. Mance wanting Melisandre to know that Stannis is dead, or claim that he's dead, could likely be part of a bigger plot between the two. Another interesting thing to note is that out of all the people brought up in the pink letter, Mance is the only one to have his name directly stated. Now the word bastard is mentioned in the letter 4 times, almost seeming a bit forced. If Mance was the author, he could have mentioned the word bastard so many times in an attempt to sound more like Ramsay. Mance was also there when Jon received his first letter from Ramsay, so Mance likely saw Ramsay's handwriting and knows the type of wording Ramsay would use to write a letter. Now, although there is a lot of evidence that Mance wrote the pink letter, there are still some inconsistencies. While Mance probably does know his way around Winterfell and could get the supplies needed to write the letter, we still have zero proof that Mance even has the ability to write. It's never actually stated in the books whether or not Mance is literate. We know that Mance's mother was a common woman, and his father was a brother of the Night's Watch. It seems very unlikely that a common-born bastard, former brother of the Night's Watch, would know how to read or write. Not to mention, when Mance was in the Night's Watch, he was a ranger, so reading or writing wouldn't be important to his position there. So we really have no indication that Mance is actually literate. Some try to point to Mance's anagram of Abel as being proof of literacy, but considering how similar Baal and Abel sound verbally, it doesn't seem as if one would need to be literate to create this anagram, so this doesn't really confirm anything. Now, I'm not saying that Mance is definitely illiterate, so this disproves the entire theory, just that there's no clear-cut evidence to support Mance knowing how to read or write. The motives aren't very clear either. Let's say Mance wrote the pink letter because he wanted revenge against Jon, and wanted to be united with the wildlings once again. Mance has been in Winterfell for a while, so he can probably see how large Ramsay's army is, and he would also know that Stannis' army is snowbound. Looking at it from this perspective, it seems as if Ramsay would win. We see Jon try to assimilate the wildlings into the Night's Watch and a Dance with Dragons, so it doesn't seem out of touch to say that Jon could bring the wildlings down south with him. If Jon did come down south with the wildlings, then he would have to face off with Ramsay, and considering how badly the wildlings were defeated by Stannis, they would probably be easily defeated by Ramsay as well, especially if they've been traveling through the brutal snows for weeks or months. Mance doesn't want his people to go through war anymore, so this motive seems unlikely. Another one of the motives that isn't clear is Mance writing the pink letter in an effort to help Stannis beat Ramsay. We've discussed why from Mance's perspective it seems as if Ramsay would win. Some think that because of this, Mance wrote the letter to help Jon rally forces to bring down south to aid Stannis. This is unlikely though, as Mance traveled to Winterfell himself, so he probably knows that by the time Jon and the Night's Watch got there, it would be weeks or months after the battle. It also seems unlikely that Mance would want to help Jon or Stannis at all. Why would Mance want to support Jon after he betrayed him? Why would Mance want to help Stannis, the same man who killed so many of his people, just to risk killing even more? Stannis is another popular suspect for the pink letter, and it's easy to see why. Stannis would have a definite motive for writing the letter. His army's starving and hugely outnumbered, so he could use the reinforcements that Jon could bring down. Or he could want Jon to come down south to Winterfell to join his cause, as having a Stark behind him is really the only way he could get the Northern Lords to follow him. He's tried to get Jon to join him before, offering to make him Lord of Winterfell, but Jon refused. Knowing this, Stannis may have written the pink letter as a last resort to get Jon to join his cause, and we see that this motivation works, as Jon does attempt to go south at the end of A Dance with Dragons, although it ultimately leads to his demise. Now looking at the content of the letter, there's a lot of evidence to support Stannis writing it. One of the phrases used, quote, "I want my bride back, and I want my reek," is almost word for word the exact phrase that Theon tells him in the Theon Winds of Winter chapter. Stannis also previously told Theon that he may hear he's dead, which could indicate that Stannis may have been planning to fake his death. Another thing to note is that Val is mentioned in the letter, and she's referred to as the Wildling Princess, which is a phrase that really only Stannis uses. Although, there are still many inconsistencies with Stannis writing the letter. Stannis is a very experienced battle commander, so he would know it would probably take weeks, if not months, for Jon to reach him by the time he's gotten the pink letter. And it would probably take even longer, considering the harsh snows outside of Winterfell. So it's extremely unlikely that Jon would have been able to reach Stannis by the time Stannis battled the Boltons. Not to mention, the last time we see Theon, he's already with Stannis, along with Jane. So why would Stannis ask for Theon and Jane? He could have been doing it to come off as more convincing, but then again, why refer to Theon as Reek? Now on to my last suspect, Wyman Manderly. Now, Wyman seems like one of the least likely people to write the letter, but there is some evidence to support this theory. Now, during A Dance with Dragons, it's no secret that Wyman Manderly is planning to betray the Boltons, and the Boltons are highly suspicious of him. Wyman hates the phrase in the Boltons after the Red Wedding, and we see in one of Davos's chapters that he's planning to back Stannis, so a motive is definitely there. Now, Wyman knows that the Night's Watch takes no part in the Wars of the Realm, so he knows that Jon would need a strong motivation to come down south. By writing the pink letter and faking the author as Ramsay, he gives Jon a reason to do just that, since in the letter, Ramsay threatens the Night's Watch Lord Commander by saying, quote, "Keep them from me, and I will cut out your bastard's heart and eat it." Now, if Ramsay threatens Stannis, Jon can't really do anything about that, but if Ramsay threatens Jon and the Night's Watch, then Jon could have a legitimate reason to come down south without breaking his vows. So Wyman could have written this in an effort to get Jon to come down south, but not have to break his vows in order to do so. Although this didn't really work out, considering that the Night's Watch brothers murdered him not too long after that. Wyman has also been traveling with the Boltons for a while, so he knows Ramsay's mannerisms and is probably aware of his bastard insecurity. He would also know that Ramsay calls Theon Reek, and could refer to Theon as Reek in the letter in an effort to sound more convincing as Ramsay. It's also safe to say that Wyman faking being Ramsay for political gain wouldn't be too out of his character. When Davos arrives in White Harbor in A Dance with Dragons, Wyman humiliates him, declaring that he'll execute him for betraying the crown, only to later reveal that it was all a plot to make him look loyal to the Lannisters, when in reality he's planning to support Stannis. Wyman would also know about all the events stated in the letter, considering he's been with Ramsay at Winterfell this entire time. While there are some good reasons to support Wyman writing the letter, this theory isn't exempt from inconsistencies. There's no real reason why Wyman would want Val and Mance's son, nor Melisandre, Shireen, and Selyse. Melisandre, Shireen, and Selyse are all safe at the Wall, so really the only reason he would want them would be to unite them with Stannis during or after the battle. Although, this would be highly risky and unnecessary. Again, if the motivation is to get Jon to come down south, the letter focuses an awful lot on Mance and the Wildlings. Wyman would also know that it would take weeks or months for any reinforcements to get down to Winterfell, so this wouldn't really be that great of a plan. Another thing to note is that since it's highly likely that Wyman is going to betray the Boltons once they're sent out to battle, they wouldn't really need Jon of the Night's Watch. Wyman has thousands of men with him, and the Night's Watch is a dwindling army and at this point is made up of mostly wildlings, so they wouldn't really be that beneficial to his cause. So who do you think wrote the pink letter? Do you think that Stannis is actually dead? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time with another video. Peace.